The emergency session of the Galactic Concord began at 300 Imperial Standard Time, which meant that half the delegates were either half asleep or fully furious about being woken. Grand Admiral Verk of the Thavian hegemony stood at the head of the crescent-shaped chamber, his four upper arms folded in the posture his species reserved for controlled irritation. Behind him, a holographic display showed a blinking red dot on the outer rim of Sector 7, a colony world called Adara's Rest, home to roughly 40,000 mixed-species settlers, mostly Drenhai, and a smattering of Veloci merchants. It had gone dark 6 hours ago. "Raider activity," said Senator Morn of the Veloci Compact, waving a dismissive tendril. "It's always raiders out there. Send a peacekeeping squadron and be done with it." Verk didn't argue. He agreed. The outer rim was lawless, underfunded, and perpetually irritating. He dispatched 3 cruisers and a frigate under the command of Fleet Captain Das, a reliable, unimaginative officer, which was exactly what you wanted for a routine pacification run. Nobody mentioned humans. Why would they? Humanity was a footnote, a tiny, single-world species tucked into the unfashionable end of the Orion Arm. The Concord's last official survey of human space had been conducted 312 years ago by a bored cartographic vessel that spent exactly 4 days in the system, noted that the dominant species had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel, classified them as Category 3 developing, and moved on. The file had never been updated. In fairness, there had been one anomalous report, a brief navigational memo from a Thavian trade ship in what humans called 2271 CE. The memo read, "Avoid Sector 7, Subregion 4 of the Orion Arm. The locals appear to be constructing something of considerable scale in orbital space. Nature unclear. Recommend monitoring." No monitoring was ever conducted. The memo sat in a database that nobody had accessed in 2 centuries, buried under approximately 16 million other low-priority entries, slowly accumulating the digital equivalent of dust. This was, in hindsight, the single greatest administrative failure in the history of the Galactic Concord. But no one knew that yet. Fleet Captain Das made the jump to Adara's Rest at 3:40. His ships were well-armed, well-crewed, and entirely relaxed. The crew of the lead cruiser, the Thavian Resolve, were 3 hours into a shift rotation. 2 ensigns were playing a card game in the mess. The ship's cook was arguing with the inventory system about protein rations. At 4:12, the Thavian Resolve dropped out of FTL. Das stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, and looked at the view screen. Adara's Rest floated serenely in the middle distance, its amber and green surface completely undamaged. The colony's orbital platforms were intact. The lights were on. Surrounding the colony, in a rough dispersal pattern consistent with a battle that had ended recently, were the shattered remains of 6 vessels. Das recognized the hull configuration immediately: Vorath Raider ships, heavy ones, the kind that usually required a conquered battle group to neutralize. They had been torn apart. Not disabled, not crippled into surrender, torn apart. The largest piece of debris Das could identify was roughly 1/4 of a Vorath bridge module, and it was venting atmosphere into space with the quiet finality of something that had lost an argument it hadn't known it was having. Das opened his mouth to speak. His sensor officer beat him to it. "Captain," the ensign's voice had gone very quiet, very carefully controlled, the voice of someone who was frightened but was a professional and was handling it. "Captain, I have a contact, single vessel, bearing 317, distance approximately 40,000 kilometers." Das turned to the sensor display. The contact was enormous. His display struggled to classify it. No IFF signal, no transponder, no registration code that matched anything in the Imperial database. The hull geometry was angular, brutal, built with an aesthetic that suggested function had been the only consideration, and elegance had never been invited to the meeting. It was just sitting there. Not moving, not fleeing, not hailing. Just sitting there the way a large, patient animal sits, the kind that has nothing to prove because it has already proven everything. Then the tactical display lit up. "Captain," the ensign's voice cracked slightly on the word. "Captain, it's running targeting solutions on us." Das stared at the screen. "What is that thing?" he whispered. The ship had no answer. The database had no answer. 300 years of Imperial records had no answer. Somewhere in a forgotten memo on a forgotten server, a Thavian trader was still trying to warn them. Fleet Captain Doss did not panic. This was either a testament to his training or evidence of a very specific kind of stubbornness, the sort that refuses to accept that the universe has suddenly and catastrophically changed, because accepting it would require doing something about it immediately. He stared at the tactical display for 4 full seconds. The unknown vessel had not fired. It had run targeting solutions, painted his ships with whatever sensor array it used, but the weapon's indicators remained cold. It was watching him the way a predator watches something that has wandered into its territory, with patience and with complete confidence that it controlled the situation entirely. "All stop," Doss said. "Do not raise shields, do not power weapons." His tactical officer turned to look at him. "Sir, if that thing fires—" "If that thing wanted to fire, we would already be debris," Doss said, with a calmness he absolutely did not feel. "Look at what it did to 6 Vorath heavy raiders. We are 3 cruisers and a frigate. We are not a threat to it. Do not give it a reason to treat us like one." The bridge went silent. The unknown ship continued to watch. Doss keyed his comms. "All ships, maintain position. No aggressive maneuvers. I am transmitting standard Concord diplomatic hailing on all frequencies." He paused. "And someone get me everything in the database on unregistered vessel classes in this sector." His comms officer sent the hail. The response was not immediate, but it came, a signal on a frequency that wasn't in the Concord's standard communication index, using a modulation pattern that the ship's computer took nearly 2 minutes to decode. What emerged from the decoder was not an alien language. It was human. Specifically, it was a pre-recorded automated identification broadcast, the kind a vessel sends out as a matter of navigation protocol rather than active communication. It gave a ship name, a registry number, and a fleet designation. The comms officer read it out loud in the flat, careful voice of someone reading a sentence they don't fully believe. "UNSC Perseverance, United Nations Space Command, Sol Defense Fleet 3rd Expeditionary." Silence on the bridge. Doss turned slowly to his intelligence officer, a sharp-minded Veloci named Kret who had, until this moment, been the most composed person in the room. Kret's skin, a natural communicator of emotional state in his species, had gone the pale, washed-out gray of extreme confusion. "Humans," Doss said. It wasn't a question. "Humans," Kret confirmed. "But sir, humans don't have ships, not like this. Humans are Category 3, pre-warp, last surveyed." 300 years ago," Doss said. The words sat in the air between them, like something heavy that had been dropped. 300 years. Doss looked back at the view screen. The Perseverance hadn't moved. It was approximately 4 kilometers long by his best estimate, a rough measurement because the ship's geometry made clean sensor readings difficult. Its hull was dark, not black, but a very deep gray that seemed to absorb light without reflecting it. Along its flanks were rows of what the tactical computer tentatively identified as weapons emplacements, though they used configurations that matched nothing in the Imperial Arsenal database. Whatever those weapons were, 6 Vorath heavy raiders had found out the hard way. Doss transmitted his full sensor report to Imperial High Command, attached a preliminary observation, nature of contact unknown. Recommend immediate consultation with Xenology and Intelligence divisions, and settled in to wait for a response. It took 11 minutes for High Command to reply. The message was 2 words: "Come home." Back at the Thavian Imperial capital, the reaction to Doss's report was best described as controlled hysteria. Grand Admiral Verk read the sensor data 3 times, handed it to his intelligence chief, watched her read it once, and observed with some professional satisfaction that her skin also went gray. There was comfort in shared confusion. Within the hour, the report had reached the Emperor's Council. Within 2 hours, it had leaked, as everything always leaked, and the corridors of the Imperial administration were buzzing with something between curiosity and dread. Intelligence Director Helvin called an emergency briefing and pulled every file the Concord had on humanity. There were not many. The survey from 312 years ago, the navigational memo, 3 intercepted human radio transmissions from approximately 200 years ago, which had been categorized as cultural noise and filed under low-priority species. No further action required. a blurry long-range optical image of what might have been an orbital construction frame, taken incidentally by a survey drone 140 years ago and never followed up on. That was everything. 300 years of silence, and at the end of it, a ship 4 kilometers long, floating over a colony it had apparently decided to protect, running targeting solutions on conquered warships with the relaxed confidence of something that had done this before. Helvin stared at the image of the Perseverance for a long time. "Find me a linguist," she said finally, "someone who speaks human." Linguist, they found, was not what intelligence director Helvin expected. Siravel was young, barely into her 3rd decade, which for a Thavian was still practically adolescence. She had studied human languages as an academic curiosity, a niche interest that her university supervisors had gently described as professionally inadvisable. Human studies wasn't a career path. Humans weren't going anywhere. They were a Category 3 species in a quiet corner of a minor arm, interesting perhaps to historians, irrelevant to anyone else. Siravel had studied them anyway because she found them strange, and she had always been drawn to strange things. She stood now in the intelligence briefing room, surrounded by flag officers and senior analysts twice her age, looking at the sensor image of the Perseverance with an expression of profound, uncontained fascination. "You can communicate with them?" Helvin asked. "I can speak 3 of their major language variants," Siravel said, "and I've studied their communication protocols. That automated broadcast your captain received, that's standard UNSC identification format. It means the ship is military, active duty, and registered to a fleet structure." She paused. "A fleet structure implies more than one ship." The room absorbed that. "How many more?" Verk asked. "I don't know," Siravel said honestly. "But the designation says 3rd Expeditionary, which implies at minimum a 1st and a 2nd. Another silence. Siravel was given a communication terminal and a direct line to the Perseverance's frequency. She composed her hail carefully, formal, non-threatening, identifying herself as a diplomatic representative of the Galactic Conquered, expressing peaceful intent, requesting dialogue. The response came back in 11 minutes. It was a human voice, female, measured, carrying the particular cadence of someone who was very accustomed to being in charge and very unimpressed by the present circumstances. The universal translator HFY War rendered it into Thavian as she listened. "This is Commander Yale Oren of the UNSC Perseverance. We received your hail. We're willing to talk. For the record, we were here at Adara's Rest because the colony requested assistance. 6 Vorath raider vessels entered the system 40 hours ago and began targeting civilian infrastructure. We neutralized them. The colony is safe. Your peacekeeping squadron arrived after the situation was resolved." A pause. "We suggest your squadron stands down. They're making everyone nervous." Siravel relayed this to the room. Helvin leaned forward. "Ask her, what does humanity want?" Siravel transmitted the question. The reply was shorter this time. "Right now, a conversation. That would be a good start." What followed over the next 72 hours was not a conversation so much as a controlled unraveling of 3 centuries of assumptions. Intelligence pulled everything. Academic papers on human biology, what little existed. The intercepted radio signals from 2 centuries ago, which, reviewed now with fresh urgency, revealed a species that had been watching the stars with extraordinary longing and building toward them with methodical determination. One analyst found, buried in the archive, a human transmission from approximately 180 years ago. It was a news broadcast, not a military signal, a human journalist reporting on what the transmission's metadata labeled the 3rd Mars expansion. The Conquered had filed it under irrelevant cultural noise. They played it now in the briefing room. The analyst translated in real time, haltingly. A human correspondent standing in front of an enormous construction facility, gesturing at partially assembled ship frames behind her, describing, with evident pride, the largest shipbuilding program in human history. It had launched, according to the broadcast, in response to a detection. A shadow at the edge of the solar system. An unidentified vessel, large, non-human, apparently observing and then departing without making contact. Verk looked at the date on the file. He looked at the log of Thavian survey vessels that had passed through that region around the same time. He closed his eyes. We spooked them, he said quietly. The room was very still. A survey drone, one of ours. It passed through their system 180 years ago on a routine cartographic sweep. Didn't stop, didn't make contact, just passed through. He opened his eyes. And they saw it, and they decided that if there was something out there that large and that indifferent, they needed to be ready. 180 years. That was how long humanity had been building. Helvin looked at the image of the Perseverance on the main display. 4 kilometers of dark gray metal, weapons emplacements, and quiet, absolute readiness. Get me more linguists, she said, and someone draft a diplomatic protocol. We need to understand exactly what we are dealing with before this gets any worse. It was already, though none of them knew it yet, about to get significantly worse. Ravel spoke to Commander Oren every day for a week. The conversations were, on the surface, procedural, establishing communication protocols, confirming the safety of Adara's rest, arranging for the Thavian peacekeeping squadron to be rotated out without incident. Commander Oren was professional, precise, and possessed of a dry humor that Ravel's translation software occasionally failed to catch, but that she herself understood intuitively. The conversations were not just procedural. Ravel asked questions, carefully, diplomatically, in the way a good linguist asks questions, not direct interrogation, but the kind of gentle, curious probing that makes the other person feel heard rather than examined. Oren answered more than she probably should have, which Ravel suspected was deliberate. Oren struck her as the kind of person who chose very precisely what to reveal, and who revealed things not accidentally but strategically, giving you just enough to draw your own conclusions, because the conclusions you drew yourself were more persuasive than anything she could tell you. What Ravel learned, assembled piece by piece from a week of conversations, was this. Humanity had detected the Thavian survey drone 180 years ago. They had tracked it, lost it, and spent the following decade in fierce internal debate about what it meant. The debate had produced no consensus except on one point. Whatever was out there, humanity could not afford to be unprepared for it. The construction program had begun quietly, funded by a coalition of human governments that disagreed about virtually everything except this. It had continued for 180 years, expanding in scope as human technology advanced, as new discoveries were made, as the implications of what lived in the galaxy beyond their solar system became gradually, uncomfortably clearer through long-range observation. They had not come out of hiding until they felt ready. And their definition of ready, Ravel understood this now with absolute clarity, was not the same as anyone else's definition. She filed her report to Helvin on the 8th day. It was classified immediately, restricted to a council of 12. The relevant section read, humanity did not expand into the galaxy out of curiosity or ambition. They expanded because they made a calculated determination that remaining isolated was, long-term, more dangerous than emerging. They are not aggressive. They do not appear to want conquest, resources, or territory beyond what they currently hold. What they want, and this is the part I urge the Council to absorb carefully, is stability. They believe the galaxy is dangerous. They believe they are capable of making it less dangerous, and they have spent 180 years building the tools to act on that belief. They are not aggressive, they are prepared. There is a difference, and it is terrifying. The report reached Senator Drath of the Thavian Military Council on a Tuesday. He read it twice, set it down, and convened an emergency closed session of the Council's Security Committee. Drath was not a stupid man. He was, however, a frightened one, and frightened men in positions of power have historically made decisions that look, in hindsight, like the kind of decisions that only frightened men in positions of power could possibly make. The session lasted 4 hours. At the end of it, a motion had passed. Humanity was an unregistered military power operating without Concord oversight in Concord-adjacent space. This was, technically, a violation of the Concord's border protocols. Action should be taken. Helvin, when informed of the motion, requested an urgent meeting with Drath. She was told the council had already drafted the order. She asked, very carefully, whether anyone on the council had read her intelligence report. There was a pause. We read the summary, said Drath's aide. Helvin closed her eyes. The summary, she said, was 1 page. The report was 40. The summary did not include the section about the fleet. Another pause. "What fleet?" the aide asked. Helvan said nothing for a moment. Outside her window, the lights of the imperial capital glittered across a kilometer of manicured skyline, beautiful and utterly oblivious. "Get me a direct line to Drath," she said, "right now." She did not get it in time. The order had already been transmitted. The diplomatic shuttle that carried Ravel to the Perseverance was small, unarmed, and painted white. The Concord's universal signal of peaceful intent, a convention so old that no one alive remembered negotiating it. Commander Orin met her at the docking bay personally. She was shorter than Ravel had expected. Humans were described in the old survey files as medium-sized bipeds, but somehow Ravel had constructed a mental image of someone more physically imposing. Orin was compact, dark-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who had long ago made peace with the weight of command. She wore a uniform that was functional to the point of austerity. No decorations except rank insignia, and a small rectangular patch on the left shoulder that bore a flag Ravel recognized from her studies, the blue field and laurel wreath of the United Nations. Ravel, Orin said, extending a hand. Ravel had read about the human handshake. She took the hand and shook it, and Orin's grip was firm but not aggressive, the grip of someone who understood the gesture as connection rather than dominance. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Ravel said. "I've been waiting for this conversation for a while," Orin replied. "Come on, I'll show you around." What Ravel saw over the next 6 hours fundamentally reorganized her understanding of the universe. The Perseverance was not simply large, it was dense. Every centimeter of space had been used deliberately. The ship carried its own manufacturing capability, fabrication bays that could produce replacement components, munitions, even additional drone craft entirely from raw material stocks. It carried a full medical facility, a hydroponic bay that produced a significant portion of the crew's food supply, a crew of 4,200 humans, and they were, to a person, calm. Not bravado calm, not forced calm. Actually calm, the calm of people who had trained for a very long time, trusted their equipment completely, and had already faced enough genuine danger that a conquered peacekeeping squadron hovering nervously at 40,000 kilometers barely registered. Orin showed her the weapon systems last. They stood in a long, dim corridor that ran along the ship's port flank, looking through reinforced viewports at the emplacements. Up close, they were less alien than they appeared on a sensor screen. There was a logic to them, a visible engineering philosophy. High-velocity kinetics, directed energy weapons. Something Orin called a spinal mass driver that ran the length of the ship's core, and that, the commander explained with quiet simplicity, was designed to defeat any armor profile the UNSC had been able to model. "You modeled our armor?" Ravel asked. "We modeled every armor profile we could observe from long range," Orin said. "We've been watching your ships for about 60 years. Passively, no contact, no interference, just watching and learning." She paused. "You've been watching us too, I assume." "Not recently," Ravel admitted. Orin nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "That's what we thought." They stood in silence for a moment. "How many ships?" Ravel asked. Orin looked at her for a moment, that calculated look, weighing what to reveal and what to keep. Then she appeared to decide. "The Sol Defense Fleet has 340 active capital ships," she said. "Cruiser class and above. We have approximately 1,200 additional vessels in the frigate and destroyer range. We also have static defense installations at every inhabited human system. There are currently 11 of those." She paused. "We're not trying to frighten you. I want to be clear about that. We built what we built because we believed it was necessary. We would prefer not to use any of it." Ravel stood very still. 300 years, 11 worlds, 1,500 ships. "What do you want?" she asked. The same question Helvan had asked a week ago, but asked now differently, asked with understanding instead of fear. "The same thing everyone wants," Orin said, "to not have to use any of this." The fleet assembled at Concord Station, 7, over the course of 4 days. 40 warships, the largest peacetime deployment in the Thavian hegemony's recent history. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, a carrier group. Senator Drath had insisted on the number personally. 40 ships, he argued, was a show of force that any species would respect. It was overwhelming. It was decisive. It sent a message. It sent a message, Helvan thought. watching the fleet's formation on the strategic display. That revealed exactly how frightened they were and exactly how little they understood what they were frightened of. She had been unable to stop the deployment. She had filed her objections in writing, argued them in person, and been overruled by a committee of people who had not read 40 pages, and had, therefore, retained a comfortable misconception about the relative military positions of the Galactic Concord and humanity. The fleet's orders were simple: transit to the border of human space, establish a formation, and transmit an ultimatum. Humanity was to submit to Concord oversight, register its fleet, and accept a monitoring protocol or face a quarantine of human space, enforced by the 40 ships now burning toward the border. Helvan drafted a personal message to Siravel: "Be ready. And whatever happens, do not let Commander Oren think this represents the entire Concord's position. It does not. Some of us understand." She sent it and waited. The fleet crossed the border marker at 1600 hours and held its formation at the designated coordinates. Fleet Admiral Kavash transmitted the ultimatum on all frequencies, in all Concord languages, and waited for a response. He waited 23 minutes. Then his comms officer said very quietly, "Sir, we have a response. It's a human vessel. It's Commander Oren." Kavash straightened, put it through. Commander Oren's voice filled the bridge. She did not sound angry. She did not sound threatened. She sounded, if anything, faintly tired, the weariness of someone who had been hoping not to have this particular conversation. "Fleet Admiral Kavash, we received your transmission. I'm going to be direct with you because I think we've passed the point where indirect communication is useful. The Concord's quarantine protocol is not viable. I want to explain why, because I think you may not have complete information. Your fleet is standing at coordinates that you believe are the boundary of human-controlled space. They are not. You crossed into our sensor coverage approximately 4 hours ago. You have been tracked since then. Every ship in your formation has been cataloged, classified, and has had a targeting solution generated and confirmed. I am not telling you this to threaten you. I am telling you so that you understand the conversation we're having. You came here to demonstrate capability. I'm letting you know what capability actually looks like in this neighborhood." A pause. "We have no interest in conflict with the Concord. We have considerable interest in a conversation with the Concord. I suggest your fleet admiral transmit a request for diplomatic dialogue rather than an ultimatum, and we can begin having the conversation that should have happened 300 years ago. We suggest you reconsider. Have a good evening." The transmission ended. Kavash stared at the display for a long moment. Then he turned to his sensor officer. "Run me a long-range sweep, everything in range, full spectrum." The sensor officer ran it. What came back onto the display made the bridge go completely silent. Beyond the border marker, at varying distances, stationary, dark, and waiting, were ships. Not the Perseverance alone. Not a single vessel that had been politely showing the flag. "Ships." The sensor officer counted aloud. He stopped at 64 and then said, "Sir, I'm detecting more contact signatures deeper in. The range limit is cutting off the count." Kavash looked at the display, at the neat, patient grid of contacts. At the weapon's signatures, his sensors were just barely resolving, each one representing a capability his tactical computer was straining to classify. He thought about the 6 destroyed Vorath raiders. He thought about the word reconsider. He picked up his comms and sent one message back to Imperial High Command. It read, "Diplomatic dialogue. Immediately, please. Commander Yale Oren arrived at the Imperial capital on a Thursday." She came alone. This detail, transmitted in advance, confirmed, and still somehow not believed, until she actually stepped off the shuttle, caused more anxiety in the Imperial security apparatus than anything that had come before it. An entire interspecies diplomatic crisis, and the human representative arrived unescorted, unarmed, carrying a single bag, and asked politely if there was somewhere to get coffee before the summit began. There was considerable debate about what this meant. Arrogance was the leading theory. Helvan argued it was something more precise: confidence. Not arrogance, which is the performance of capability; confidence, which is its internalization. Oren didn't bring guards because she didn't need them, and she knew she didn't need them, and she didn't feel any particular need to perform anything for anyone. She was shown to guest quarters. She slept 8 hours, she ate breakfast. She arrived at the summit chamber at 900, exactly on schedule, and looked around the crescent table at 12 of the most powerful figures in the Galactic Concord, admirals, senators, intelligence directors, and said, "Thank you for making time. Shall we get started?" Helvin had prepared extensively for the negotiation, but she found, an hour in, that it wasn't really a negotiation in the conventional sense. Oren had come with a position. It was clear, it was detailed, and it had apparently been prepared not in the last week, but over a very long period of time, refined, tested, considered from every angle by people who had been thinking about this meeting since before any of the people currently in the room had been born. Oren placed a data chip on the table. "This is the Treaty of Mutual Recognition," she said. "We wrote it. You're welcome to modify the language, we'd expect that. But the core clauses are non-negotiable, and I want to walk you through them so there are no misunderstandings." She was direct, completely, unambiguously direct. Helvin had worked with diplomats her entire career, and every one of them had shared a fundamental professional instinct. Never say what you mean immediately, because the space between what you say and what you mean is where leverage lies. Oren didn't seem to have that instinct. Or rather, Helvin revised this thought carefully, she had it, and had made a calculated decision to abandon it, because she had calculated that she didn't need it. Clause 1. Mutual recognition. The Galactic Concord would formally recognize humanity as a sovereign spacefaring civilization with full territorial rights over currently occupied systems. Clause 2. Equal standing. Humanity would join the Concord as a full member state, not a subject or protectorate, with voting rights equivalent to those of the Thavian hegemony. Clause 3. Open trade. Standard Concord trade protocols applied without tariff discrimination. Clause 4. Senator Drath read Clause 4 twice. Then he read it a third time because he wanted to be absolutely certain he was understanding it correctly. "You're saying," he said slowly, "that if any conquered member world is attacked, any world, not just your own, humanity will respond. Militarily." "Correct," Oren said. "Without conquered authorization, without a vote." "Without delay," Oren said. "If one of your worlds is burning, you don't have time to wait for a vote. We respond and we discuss politics afterward." Drath set down the document. "That's not a treaty clause, that's a guarantee, a unilateral guarantee." "Yes," Oren said. "Why?" he asked. It came out raw, the genuine bewilderment of a man who had spent his entire career calculating advantage and was confronted with something that didn't fit the model. "What do you get from this?" Oren looked at him for a moment. "A stable galaxy," she said, "which is ultimately the only thing that keeps any of us safe, including us." She leaned forward slightly. "Senator, we have been watching your corner of the universe for 60 years. We have watched border conflicts drag on for decades because no one wanted to be the one to commit. We have watched predatory species raid civilian populations because the cost of intervention was considered too high. We've watched the conquered manage these problems rather than solve them, because managing them is cheaper, until suddenly it isn't." She paused. "We're not doing this out of charity. We're doing this because a galaxy where the conquered is stable and safe is a galaxy where humanity is stable and safe. We just happen to have the capability to help make that happen. So we will." The room was very quiet. Helvin looked at the treaty document. It was, she realized, the most politely delivered ultimatum in recorded history. Humanity was not asking to be accepted. They were offering something that had genuine value, and making it clear that the offer came from a position of such complete security that rejection was not a threat to them but merely an inconvenience. They did not need this treaty to survive. They were offering it because it was good for everyone. "I have one question," Helvin said. Oren looked at her. "What do you call this?" Helvin asked. "This philosophy, this doctrine of watching, building, and then coming forward to offer stability rather than conquest. Do you have a name for it?" Oren thought about it for a moment. "My grandfather called it the oldest job in the world," she said. She didn't elaborate, but she signed the treaty at 1400 hours, and every delegate at that table signed it after her, and it was done. The Treaty of Mutual Recognition was ratified by the Galactic Concord's full assembly 6 weeks later, by a margin that surprised even Helvin, 89% in favor. The initial panic had, for most delegates, resolved into something more nuanced: relief. Not the relief of narrowly avoiding disaster, but the relief of a problem being solved by someone else who was very good at solving it. Humanity joined the conquered. It did not notably change very much about how humanity operated. The UNSC continued to run patrols. The Sol Defense Fleet continued its exercises. Human shipyards continued to build, though at a slightly reduced pace now that the strategic calculus had shifted. What changed was context. Humanity was no longer an unknown, a rumor, a dark contact on a sensor screen that had no name in the database. They had a name now. And names, as anyone in the galaxy could tell you, change things. The first test of the Mutual Defense Clause came 8 months after ratification. A Veloci colony in the Outer Rim, a small world called Fennes, population 60,000, was raided by a fleet of Dreth privateers. 6 ships, heavily armed, who had calculated that the Outer Rim was too far from the Imperial core for a rapid response. They were correct about the Conquered. It would have taken 3 weeks to assemble a response fleet and debate the operational protocol. They were catastrophically incorrect about the Perseverance, which was on patrol in the adjacent sector. Orin arrived in 14 hours. The Dreth privateers, confronted with a human warship that had already run targeting solutions before they'd even registered it on sensors, attempted to flee. 2 escaped. 4 did not. No Veloci civilian was harmed. The entire engagement lasted 40 minutes. The after-action report Orin filed was 11 lines. The last line read, "Colony secure, returning to patrol." Ravel became humanity's first permanent liaison to the Conquered, a position that hadn't existed before and that required a certain personality type, someone comfortable living permanently between worlds, translating not just language but intent, not just words but the deep cultural logic behind them. She was good at it. She spent a lot of time explaining humans to species who had not expected humans and were still, years later, slightly unsettled by them. Not by their aggression, it quickly became clear that Orin had been telling the truth, that humanity had no imperial ambitions, no hunger for territory, no desire to dominate. What unsettled people was subtler than that? It was the readiness, the perpetual, absolute, non-anxious readiness. Humans moved through the galaxy in the particular way of people who had prepared thoroughly for something they hoped would never happen and were quietly, genuinely pleased when it didn't, but who were never, not for a single moment, unprepared for it to happen. They were, Ravel came to understand, the galaxy's institutional memory for danger. They had looked out at the stars when they were still a single-world species and thought, something is out there, and it may not be friendly, and we should be ready. And they had spent 180 years acting on that thought with a patience and a discipline that most species couldn't sustain for 180 days. One evening, nearly 2 years after the treaty signing, Ravel sat with Admiral Verk in his office at the Imperial capital. They were watching, on a long-range display, the joint patrol, a Thavian cruiser, and a human destroyer running a sweep pattern along the Outer Rim, moving in the easy synchrony of ships that had been running patrols together long enough to know each other's rhythms. 40 years ago, Verk said, that sector had 3 active pirate networks. We managed them, kept them contained, never fully solved the problem. He watched the patrol. Last incident was 8 months ago, the Dreth privateers. A pause. Humans were there in 14 hours. Ravel nodded. What do they call it? Verk asked. Orin mentioned a word once when I asked her about their doctrine. She said her grandfather used it, she didn't explain it. Ravel smiled. She had asked Orin the same question a year ago and had spent some time afterward researching the answer. The doctrine has a formal name, she said. They call it deterrence, the idea that if the cost of aggression is guaranteed to be higher than the benefit, rational actors stop being aggressive. And the other word, Verk said, the grandfather's word. Ravel looked at the joint patrol on the display. The human destroyer moved with a quiet, unhurried confidence, present, watchful, untroubled. Sheepdog, she said. Verk was quiet for a moment, processing the translation. Sheep, he said, and a dog that protects them. Yes. And which are we? He asked, not bitterly, genuinely. Ravel thought about the colony at Idara's Rest, saved before the Conquered ships had even arrived. About Fennes, 60,000 lives, 40 minutes. About 6 Vorath heavy raiders that had thought they were hunting prey and had discovered they were very, very wrong. I think, she said carefully, that's a question humanity has decided not to answer out loud, because the answer is less important than the arrangement. Verk nodded slowly. Outside, the joint patrol swept on, steady and quiet, through a border that had in 2 years become the safest stretch of space in the outer rim. The galaxy was learning, slowly, what that dark shape on a sensor screen actually meant. Not a threat. A promise. And